days across the UK. It has brought some wet weather to the northwest, but the rain tending to fizzle as it pushes south. And just a few spots expected for Wales, into the Midlands, for example. However, as the cloud comes south, it will impact temperatures, mostly mid to high 20s, perhaps 31 there for London. Much cooler to the north of the cold front at 19 for Glasgow and for Belfast, but sunny skies for northern Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland behind the front, before some showers push in during the evening and overnight for mainly northern Scotland and perhaps the north coast of Northern Ireland. Otherwise, some areas of cloud further south. A cooler night in the north, but still a muggy one in the south, with temperatures staying up into the mid to high teens. Some cloud around first thing across southern parts of England, perhaps even a few light showers. That clears away, and then Wednesday promises to be a largely sunny day across much of the UK. But for Scotland, Northern Ireland, a bit more cloud and a few showers, mostly into the north of Scotland with a keen breeze here, and it will feel cool in the north. Average temperatures for Northern England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, so high teens, low 20s. But in the south, still the potential for high 20s. The heat continues to affect southern parts of the UK, and into Thursday and Friday that heat begins to build once again, and that means that there'll be plenty of sunshine for many of us heading into the weekend, but temperatures once again will become uncomfortable up into the 30s by Saturday.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
I'm Alex Phillips. Join me weekdays between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock for We Need to Talk About.
We don't need to apologise for our point of view. Things have got to change.
We're going to be covering topics that other broadcasters wouldn't dare to air. And there's a lot out there that definitely needs discussion. So join me on GB News between 2 and 3 o'clock on weekdays.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome to On the Money. I'm Alastair Stewart, standing in for my good friend Liam Halligan. And for the next hour, we'll be talking about what the retail sales tell us about the state of the economy and what the Tory leadership candidates can do about the situation that you're confronting day in, day out on that cost of living crisis. Is it time to think about coal again? I'll also be talking to a woman who did well in motorsport and now wants to encourage girls and women to break more barriers down, especially in science and technology. So, as always, a host of great subjects with people who really know their stuff. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the GB news. Here's Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, it's just 1 minute past one. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Conservative candidates have been presenting their pitches to their party to take over as Prime Minister. This morning, 3 candidates officially launched their campaigns. If they are leader of the Conservative Party, they will therefore then be the next Prime Minister. There are now 10 candidates in the race after the Transport Secretary Grant Shapps stood down and gave his support to Rishi Sunak. Well, launching his campaign, the former Chancellor has said, whilst it's not credible to promise more spending and lower taxes, he's vowed to lower the tax burden as soon as inflation's been brought under control.
My message to the party and the country is simple. I have a plan to steer our economy through these headwinds. We need a return to traditional Conservative economic values, and that means honesty and responsibility, not fairy tales. I am prepared to give everything I have in service to our nation, to restore trust, rebuild our economy and reunite the country.
Head of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Tom Tugendhat, promised to slash fuel duty by 10 pence if he was elected as Prime Minister. He says the country has retreated into division when now it needs unity.
I'm sorry, but I cannot accept retreat. We should not accept retreat. We must return to service. We need leadership with a renewed sense of mission. Leadership that sees beyond divisive politics and delivers results. Leadership that will return government to the service of our economy, our people and our country. We need a clean start.
The former Equalities Minister, Kemi Badenoch, opened her speech by saying it's time to tell the truth.
Governing involves trade-offs, and we need to start being honest about that. Unlike others, I'm not going to promise you things without a plan to deliver them. People are sick of that. They're crying out for honesty.
There are 7 other candidates who've announced they're going for the job. Everyone running needs to get their nominations in by 6 p.m. today. Each needs at least 20 supporters for their name to make it onto the ballot. Voting starts tomorrow. Eventually, the country will have a new Prime Minister by the 5th of September. Well, meanwhile, the Labour Party has put forward a motion of no confidence in the Conservative government. The opposition have repeatedly said Boris Johnson should have left Number 10 immediately after he resigned as Tory leader last week. If the vote goes ahead, expected to be tomorrow, all MPs can vote on whether the Conservatives stay in power. If the government loses, it could trigger a national election. In some other news now, Heathrow Airport is going to cap the number of daily passengers that pass through its doors as the airline industry struggles to deal with demand. Between July and September, no more than 100,000 passengers will be able to depart from the airport in West London. The measures will mean more flights will be cut after thousands have already been cancelled in a bid to prevent delays. The government's announced a £1 billion plan to rebuild 61 schools. In James Cleverly's first announcement as the new Education Secretary, he said schools would receive state-of-the-art refurbishments. The investment will provide thousands of pupils with modern classrooms, as well as new sports halls, music rooms and science labs as part of the scheme. Japan has said goodbye to its former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was assassinated last week. Amid a heavy police presence, close family and friends of Japan's longest-serving premier attended a private funeral service in Tokyo. Abe was shot when he was making his speech at a campaign event last week. After the ceremony, the hearse bearing Abe's body was carried in a procession through the streets of Tokyo. Downing Street says significant work's being done to protect the most vulnerable during the heatwave. The spokesperson said planning's underway within the NHS, local councils and transport networks. It's after the Met Office issued an amber alert for extreme heat for Sunday, covering most of England and parts of Wales, warning of possible dangers to life from heat. This is GB News, and I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to Alistair for today's On the Money.
Rosie, thanks very much indeed. This is On the Money. Confirmation where confirmation needed. We spent less last month than in the months before. Pretty well everywhere and on everything. The retail sales figures show other sharp falls, fueling fears of recession and even worse. Now, these numbers are less complex than perhaps the money supply figures or the rates of exchange, although we'll be talking about that in a moment as well. They simply record what we've been up to and what we've not been up to. But drill into them and we get two key areas of interest. If you don't buy a new washing machine, for example, that's bad for Currys, Debenhams and all the rest of them. It also means that it's bad news for delivery drivers, for component manufacturers, for steel makers, and on and on. Second, as the Tory party continues with their leadership contest and choose the next leader of the party and indeed the next Prime Minister, it piles the pressure on the candidates to explain precisely what they would do come September to help you buy that washing machine and help everyone else in the supply chain. Also today, given we're in an era of radical thinking in politics and in economics, what about coal? We all know there's still masses of it under our feet. Is it time to dig it up again and help on prices and even energy security? And finally, I love motorsport and I'm delighted to be talking to a woman who was a big mover and shaker in the lucrative but rather male-dominated field. She did well and is now an ambassador for opening all sorts of doors to bright females, especially those with an interest in science and technology. So that's in our Money Talks spot. So do stay with us. You're on the money for the next hour. Rather proud of the fact that whether it's me or Liam, here on The Money, we have grown-up conversations with people who really know their stuff. Tom Holder is Head of Communications at the British Retail Consortium. Christopher Nieper, OBE, is the Managing Director of clothing manufacturers David Nieper, named after his dad. Retail expert Kate Hardcastle there on the screen is also joining us, I'm delighted to say. And here in the studio throughout our programme is a good friend of mine, Victoria Scholar, who's Head of Investment at Interactive Investor. So let's cut straight to the chase on those retail sales. Tom, year on year, these numbers paint a brutally bleak picture.
Yeah, while sales values fell only about 1%, you've got to consider that inflation is running at probably over 9% this month. We await the CPI figures next week. And that suggests that sales volumes are down by a level, frankly, we've not seen since the depths of the pandemic. It's a real concerning time at the moment where retailers are squeezed between consumers who simply don't have the same kind of spending power that they did as they're sort of influenced by the high energy bills and more, and also suppliers who have got their costs going up. So retailers face higher costs but lower demand, and that's a real recipe for trouble at the moment.
Now thing, Tom, and I'll bring the other guests in just a moment, but I want you to paint that objective picture because you crunch the numbers, you've got the data, is that it comes out crystal clear that it's online as well as high street shops who are suffering. But who's suffering most?
Well, this is one of the challenges of year-on-year figures because last year online was doing exceptionally well. As we had still had, the pandemic was going on, people were still buying more online. So a little bit of the decline in online sales we're seeing is a sort of return to the normal. And in a similar way, stores are benefiting from that as they're sort of still recovering from the pandemic. But around 2 in every £5 we spend at the moment is being spent online, excluding food, which is a little bit down on the previous year, but still much higher than we were pre-pandemic. But overall, both online and in stores are finding a difficult time at the moment in the face of these huge costs and soaring inflation.
All right, Tom, I'm going to come back to you when we get on to what can be done and by whom, but I'm delighted now to bring in my next guest, Christopher, sitting there to the left of your screen. Christopher, clothing can be a bit of what economists call a discretionary item, some of the stuff that you only buy when you really need it. You're a manufacturer, but what are the retailers telling you about what it's like there at the front line?
Yeah, hello, Alistair. Actually, it's quite a mixed picture. Let's not be too gloomy about it. Of course, sales are going down nationally, and inflation is biting quite hard. But in fact, our sales have gone up. Yes, we're a manufacturer, but we also retail all of our own garments. And we're finding there's probably the highest demand we've ever had for a British-made product. I think it's a case now of buy once and buy well, rather than buy cheap and throw away.
Do you know, Christopher, I just want to butt in because those are two absolutely vital points. My generation and my parents' generation remember buy British, back Britain and what have you. And it was a good habit back in the day. But also the idea of quality. You're prepared to spend a little bit more money if you're absolutely guaranteed that this is going to be something, pair of trousers, a suit, whatever it might be, that's going to last you.
No, that's absolutely right. If you buy quality, it'll last you. So if you buy something that'll last for 5 years or 10 years, it's going to be far cheaper than something that lasts for only, a few months. So I think there's a massive switch we're finding to buy once and buy well. And our sales are actually up by 13% so far this year. In fact, in the last 3 months, they're up by even more. And we've got really strong demand from Europe too. So yes, we're facing pressures from inflation and a much bigger pressure, by the way, on scarcity of skills, which is something that the next Prime Minister should really tackle rather than trying to bribe us with tax cuts. But I'm sure he'll come to that later. But let's not be too gloomy. Now is an opportunity for retailers and manufacturers to do the right thing for the country.
Vital message to receive, and I'm delighted at that point then to bring our good friend Kate Hardcastle in, who is an expert in the retail sector. Really fascinating stuff from Christopher there. I mean, not only about don't be too gloomy, but go for quality, go for durability. Consumers are getting smarter, aren't they? Albeit in tricky circumstances.
Thanks for having me, Alistair. Yes, absolutely. As you know, I've spent 20 years working around the globe, focusing on one person only, the you and me in the equation, the consumer, who's so incredibly important. And it's really, really vital we understand at the start of this conversation why we're seeing these figures today. We shop emotionally. That's the long and the short of it. Therefore, talk of a recession absolutely is concerning for consumers. The reality of the cost of living crisis that they're experiencing means that, yes, economists might look at that and think, well, perhaps the consumer should think, I'll buy now whilst I can afford. That isn't the mentality. The immediate mentality for most of us is to tighten our belts. And I absolutely agree that not only that idea of buy cheap, buy twice is something that's really resonating with consumers, but because of the continued evolvement of how we stand sustainability, many of us don't have the disposable income to reach up to products that perhaps have gone through certain manufacturing processes and therefore would be the most valid when it comes to sustainable issues. But one thing we can all have an effect on is less waste. When you think that the average household wastes about 30% of the food it takes through the door, that's an immediate way consumers can control their finances. And indeed, by buying items that are going to last us longer, we can have part of that slow fashion, that slow retail way of living, which is going to help across so many measures. So I don't think it has to be a time for gloom, but I think it does have to be a time for reality. And if you're in retail out there, you have to understand how important it is more than ever now to make sure messaging to your consumers is about how you're going to deliver value, quality and service.
Great wisdom there from Kate. Victoria, let me bring you in before I then segue on to what government can and should do to get us out of this mess. And the reason I want to segue is to say exactly that. If they don't, then we are looking at a possible recession and even worse, a slump. What are investors saying? What are share prices telling us? We've talked about Debenhams, we've talked about Amazon, all sorts of folk. What is the market telling an analyst like you?
Well, obviously it's been a very, very volatile and jittery time for the markets this year, and it's all been driven by this revival in inflation that's come post-pandemic. You know, we've seen supply chain bottlenecks as we've emerged from the pandemic, and that's been coupled with supercharged demand that sent prices rising across the board, and we've seen that in supermarkets, in fuel, in energy bills, in pretty much
And as Christopher was saying, for
everything.
quality products, still there.
Yes, and now we're starting to see in the economic data that there are signs of a slowdown. We're seeing consumer confidence at a record low. We're seeing the fourth consecutive monthly decline in retail sales. So that is potentially paving the way to a recession.
Okay. You and I are going to chat a bit more after the break, but I'm now delighted to bring the other guests back in. So I want to know from Tom and from Kate and from Christopher what the government should do, whether any of the candidates to be our next Prime Minister have got any bright ideas. I'm going to start off with you, Christopher, because you threw, and it was a bit of a curveball, but it's a very important point. You talked about skills training as well. But in terms of stimulating the economy, what can you as a manufacturer and a retailer, with safety in mind as well, recommend to whomsoever becomes the next Prime Minister?
Thank you, Alistair. Look, we do face inflation. Our costs are going up all over the place. Cotton prices have gone up for us by 20%. Energy prices have gone through the roof. And wages, of course, are going up. But the only way we're going to get out of this recession or inflation is by trading out of it. And to trade out of it, we need skills. And there is a real massive scarcity of skills. So I think we need a nationwide attack on this. Just like vaccinating the whole population, we need to set about training Britain, training so that we can fill all these jobs. Because, as I mentioned earlier, we've got record demand, but we cannot provide the goods because we haven't got enough skills. So what I would suggest is that the government set about a tax incentive, not a giveaway, an incentive, so that all employers, large and small, are incentivized to train the next generation, sponsor students through university so we get rid of university tuition fees, and train all those skills so we can start to become more self-sufficient and produce things of a higher quality here in Britain that people want and things that last.
Christopher, for the time being, thank you for that. Tom, Kate, and indeed Victoria, more from you in just a moment, but we're talking about being on the money. We're a commercial organisation, and therefore we have to take a quick break. This is On the Money with me, Alistair Stewart, but after that break, we will keep this conversation going, and I hope, like me, you're finding it useful and jotting notes down that will help you get through this cost of living crisis.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. You're watching On the Money here at GB News, TV and radio with me, Alastair Stewart. We're talking about those retail sales figures. Just before the break, Christopher Nieper was saying that he was slightly more optimistic than perhaps some folk out there, and hurrah to that. The only way forward for the United Kingdom was to trade out of the recession, and tax cuts, yes, please, he said, but as an incentive to do better. Music to your ear, Kate, or do you disagree with the good man?
Not at all, but there are a couple of points I'd like to add into the mix, Alistair, as you wouldn't be surprised from myself. High streets, OK? We have had, I think, 10 high street ministers in as many years. The high street does more than a place to be, a place to retail. It's a place to be, a place to socialise. We need those spots rejuvenating. Clearly, even the best person in the job wouldn't have been able to create much of a legacy in a year in terms of time in office. I think that's an important role in terms of my understanding what's going to be done. Also, a great economy will always thrive when there is support for larger and smaller businesses to work side by side. Now, some of that can be generated from the business itself, but we do know we've still got 3 million organisations that haven't had support over the COVID period. They've had a perfect storm of issues. They've gone from COVID then into challenges with the cost of living crisis and inflationary rates. So I think it's time to make sure that small businesses have got security to be able to grow and prosper in our economy too.
Yeah, and it's just sticking with you for a moment, Kate, before bringing Tom into the conversation and then Victoria. Everyone's talking about tax cuts, and there are a few. Penny Mordaunt this morning in the newspapers quite specifically on the VAT dimension as far as energy costs are concerned. But there's also national insurance and people like Christopher sitting next to you there on screen. Your sector that you speak so brilliant for, it's not only us who are having to pay higher national insurance taxes, it's also employers, people who are trying to run great big organisations like Marks and Sparks and one-man, one-woman bands as well. That's a big factor.
Absolutely. It's got to be about ensuring that businesses can thrive as well as survive right now. And I don't think it's a case of inflating anything in terms of giving too much support that we're not getting that survival of the fittest. Of course, we need to go through a period of evolvement. There's the reality of the fact that I think the IRD said yesterday we're probably not going to see that easing off of price rates right through until probably Easter next year. I mean, that's a long time. We've got a long, hard winter ahead of us. So I think it's about sensible support, understanding the real issues for consumers right now. And if you're in business, talking consumers' language, they need to hear from you in terms of what the offer is and how they can be secure that if they're buying and investing with you, you're going to do right by them.
Tom, you're the comms boss at the Retail Consortium, which means you talk directly to government and whether Kate's right, I think she is right about the need to have a listening and an active high street minister as well as Chancellor of the Exchequer and the rest of it. What's your direct message then, Tom, on behalf of all retailers to Her Majesty's government and the candidates to be the leader of that government? What does the sector most need? Do you agree with Kate's analysis? Would you add to it as she did with Christopher's?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of important points being made, and I think there are two areas which the government should look at. The first is very much building on Christopher's point, is about skills and raising productivity. And one way which that can be done is by fixing the apprenticeship levy, which is already a system that is meant to incentivise training, but is so limited for retailers in terms of what they can actually use this money for. And it's not for the right types of courses that they need to train up their staff, which is meaning that the apprenticeship levy is effectively just a tax on retailers, with the money sitting in accounts unused because they're simply not able to draw upon it for the right purposes. The other aspect is dealing with this sort of array of business taxes that are there. So there is a consultation going on at the moment around business rates and particularly around the transitional relief system, which sees, over 500 million in just a few years going from the north to London and from retailers out to non-retailers. It's a system which is meant to slow the speed of change at which people's business rates go. But the problem is if you are overpaying your business rates tomorrow, you don't want to be gradually moved to your correct low rate. you want to, just like income tax or just like any other tax, you want to immediately go to the correct rate you're paying. And the transitional relief system prevents that. It is clearly a broken system as part of a wider broken business rate system, which sees retail as 5% of the economy paying 25% of all business rates. And that is a burden the high street cannot really deal to bear.
My final question to you, Tom, Christopher and Kate, in just a moment, will be whether any of the candidates who are there offering their stall to Conservative Party members, because it's only they who will choose the next Prime Minister, have got an offer that appeals to you, be you a Conservative or not, none of my business. But that's what I want you to think about while I just bring Victoria in for her penultimate thought on this. I was quite interested as an economist, and you're a proper economist, I just did it years ago at university, that so much of what those three said is what we'd call supply side stuff. It's about skills, it's about training, high quality workforce, confidence, much less on the demand side. Cutting taxes and putting more money in our pockets. That's really interesting and quite important.
It is really, really interesting because those tax cuts, which we've heard a lot of pledges for from the potential leadership candidates, we have to remember that the side effect of those is that they can be extremely inflationary. You know, we're coming off the back of a period when billions were spent during the pandemic on expensive programmes like the furlough scheme, like track and trace, like the vaccine rollout.
Yeah.
So the government has been focusing on fiscal prudence and trying to balance its books. But
which of the candidates is closest to what investors, business, employers want?
I think probably Rishi Sunak, I'd say, just
really?
Because of his sort of allegiance to that fiscal prudence. But of course, tax cuts would be stimulative for the economy. But the main worry among investors right now is inflation.
Yeah.
So if we were
and that's precisely Rishi's condition. He will cut taxes, he says, but only when inflation's under control. Fine. Tom, I'm not sure if you're allowed to comment on this as the head of comms at the Retail Consortium. I'm sure you are. Which candidate do you think is closest to what the sector that you speak so eloquently for most wants?
Name specific candidates, but I will say that a number of them have spoken about business rates. The 2019 Conservative Manifesto, which is still the manifesto of the party now, mentioned a fundamental review of business rates. That failed to happen. There were minor tweaks, but no kind of fundamental review. So the retail industry will be very closely looking at those candidates that talk about fixing the broken business rate system.
And I just have to share with all of you and with the people who are kind enough to listen to our conversation on radio or watch it on television, we have a technical problem with Kate Hardcastle, so we won't be able to find out who she fancies. But if I find out, one of the team will phone her and ask her, and if we find out, I'll share that with you before we go off air. So, Christopher, it means that you get the final say, and I'm particularly keen to hear from you because there you are as a manufacturer, there you are as a retailer, and there you are as a voice of optimism. Let's try and breathe and feel confident in our way out of this threat of a recession. So who's ringing your bell? Who do you like the cut of their jib?
It's very kind of you to say that, Alistair. We're not only a manufacturer and retailer, but we're also a sponsor of education, and we sponsor the entire school in this town for 800 pupils. And I bring that in because the most successful Prime Minister that we're going to find will probably be somebody who has come from a world of enterprise, somebody who's not a career politician, and somebody perhaps who's not London-centric, somebody who understands why the 2019 election was such a watershed. If you understand how we think and what we need here in the Midlands and the North, then you'll understand that we need a small state, not a big state. We need to allow individuals and businesses to spend their own money on what they think will help drive the economy forwards. And we need to train up the country so that we can invest in our future and build the economy and get rid of this inflation and get rid of the threat of recession.
Christopher Nieper, I hope so much that some, if not all, of the candidates or their people are listening to this conversation. What a brilliant point to end upon. And Tom, Christopher, thank you both very much indeed for being discreet, but you painted a picture that I suspect an awful lot of people will completely understand. In absentia, my thanks to Kate, but also to Christopher Nieper and Tom there at the Retail Consortium. Thank you. As we've been speaking about all of those matters, consumers cutting back on spending, I had asked earlier before we came on air what you were cutting back on and why. And you have been both informed, honest, and in one or two cases, really rather witty. Ed says that he's cut back on Amazon orders. Quote, it was getting a bit of a bad habit anyway. I love that one. Mark says the main thing is gas. Luckily, I have a wood burner and already bought wood for the winter. My son built me a wood store out of pallet wood, so it cost nothing. We'll try and use that this winter instead of central heating as much as we can. Clever thinking, and lovely to make it a family thing as well. And in terms of stretching his budget, Steve says, I'm doing more home cooking and batch baking, freezing, and following the supermarket offers rather than being loyal. I also walk short journeys rather than drive. And Jaya says, I'm cutting back on named brands, mostly buying supermarket-owned brands, and even toiletries and cleaning products now, deodorant, bleach, etc. Some own brand stuff is actually better than the others. Keep those emails coming in, and we will again read out the best ones, most informative and considered, and hopefully a few more funny ones as well. We like that very much indeed. This is On the Money with me, Alastair Stewart. Coming up, today's Money Talks interview is with Justina Williams. She empowers women to break into the sport that she once was a leading light in, but also owns a female-led motor racing team. But first, let's bring you right up to date with the GB News, and here is Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's 1:31. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. Conservative candidates have been presenting their pitches to the party to replace Boris Johnson. This morning, 3 candidates have officially launched their campaigns to lead the party and therefore take over as Prime Minister. There are now 10 in the race after the Transport Secretary Grant Shapps stood down and gave his support to Rishi Sunak. Everyone running needs to get their nominations in by 6 p.m. today. Each needs at least 20 supporters for their names to be on the ballot. Voting starts tomorrow. The country will have a new Prime Minister by the 5th of September. Well, meanwhile, the Labour Party has put forward a motion for no confidence in the Conservative government. The opposition have repeatedly said Boris Johnson should have left Number 10 immediately after he resigned as Tory leader last week. If the vote goes ahead, expected to be tomorrow, all MPs can vote on whether the Conservatives stay in power. If the government loses, it could trigger a national election. In other news now, Heathrow Airport is going to cap the number of daily passengers that pass through its doors as the airline industry struggles to deal with demand. Between July and September, no more than 100,000 passengers will be able to depart from the airport in West London. The measures will mean more flights will be cut after thousands have already been cancelled in a bid to prevent delays. Japan has said goodbye to its former Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, who was assassinated last week. Amid a heavy police presence, close family and friends of Japan's longest-serving premier attended a private funeral service in Tokyo. Abe was shot when he was making a speech at a campaign event last week. After the ceremony, the hearse bearing his body was carried in a procession throughout the streets of Tokyo. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.184 to the dollar. The pound is 1.180 to the euro. The price of gold currently stands at £1,465.80 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for real-time investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. You're on the money. Quotes. It's not just the pound that slumped. The euro and yen are suffering from the dollar's strength too. They're the words of the economics commentator Alex Brummer, who writes in the Daily Mail and says the surge in the dollar has already created imbalances for the global economy. Well, forget imbalances in the global economy. They've also cost you a heck of a lot by making the cost of living crisis even worse. British pound dropped to a two-year low on Monday as the political uncertainty followed Boris Johnson's resignation, compounded by Brexit and the cost of living pressures added to the UK's gloomy economic outlook. Here with me to make sense of all of that, I'm delighted to say, still from our previous conversation, is Victoria Scholar, who is Head of Investment at Interactive Investor. First of all, back to basics, because I love folk to know exactly what we're talking about. Why does the exchange rate, and particularly the dollar, impact on that cost of living crisis that we always talk about on this programme?
OK, so currencies are looked at in pairs. So you always look at the pound against the US dollar or the euro against the US dollar. So there's always two dynamics going on. There's the pound that's moving for political and economic uncertain reasons. And then there's the dollar that's moving for its own reasons. Now, the reason why the dollar is so important, particularly when it comes to the cost of living crisis and inflation, is that most commodities are priced in dollars. So when the dollar goes up, oil becomes a lot more expensive to import. So we're seeing the pound slump to a two-year low against the US dollar. That means the dollar is at a two-year high.
No, I agree with everything. But again, just to make it crystal clear to folk kind of have to be listening to this conversation. So you can get published in the newspapers that the cost of a barrel of oil has gone from $80 to $90 to $120. That's one fact. The fact is that it now costs people a lot more to buy those barrels of oil and turn them into petrol, is why it hurts you, me and anybody else trying to fill up their car.
Yes, because oil is priced in dollars. So say if it's at $110, we then have to convert that back into our domestic currency. But essentially, what we're seeing is that when the pound goes down, that makes our exports more competitive because they're cheaper on the international markets. But our imports are now a lot more expensive. So we're importing inflation from abroad when the currency depreciates and the dollar appreciates. But that's mainly seen through the prism of commodities.
Sure. Yeah, and let me just remind you of one of the things that the brilliant Christopher Nieper said in our first conversation, where he said, and I quote back, we've got to trade our way out of this threat of recession and economic gloom. A weak pound makes that difficult.
Well,
so if he's making brilliant trousers and suits, it's a lot more tricky for him to flog it, to get it abroad.
Well, actually, it makes our goods more attractive to the international market because the pound is weaker. So in that sense, it's right. Got you. So say if you're in France and you're looking at some clothes in the UK and you want to import them back to France, they are a lot cheaper. So our imports are a lot less competitive, but our export market is more competitive. So I think what he's saying there is we should export more.
Yes, right, OK. So second area, as it were, for conversation is what is to be done. Because I do recommend to everybody kind enough to listen to us that Alex Brummer article and it's from yesterday, that particular one, which is very, very strong. He talks about a conference that he attended back in 1985, where the then President of the United States, the chair of the Federal Reserve Board, their equivalent of our Bank of England, and our Bank of England governor, were all gathered to try and do something about a crisis in exchange rates. And going back even further, you've got people like Keynes and the great Bretton Woods conferences. Brummer says we don't have the quality of world leaders right now to address that.
Well, it's difficult because we have a free-floating exchange rate. So it's based on supply and demand. And what's really driving exchange rates right now is interest rates. And we're seeing a shift towards monetary tightening or higher interest rates that's particularly aggressive from the US. So that's driving flows towards the US dollar because you can get more on your return in a bank in the US than you can in other countries.
So if people listening are thinking if they got, they might have £100,000, £500,000 to save, they'll look at what their bank offers in interest rates and they'll look at what a building society offers in interest rates. Big investors who you deal with are doing the same, but they're saying, hang on a minute, I'm going to make more in America than I'm going to make in France or in the UK.
That's true. And then there's the sort of added complexity that we're operating amid a backdrop of uncertain financial markets. We've seen big sell-offs. And so investors are looking for safe havens or ways to preserve their wealth. And the US dollar is seen as a safe haven. So it's sort of like a hideaway place, somewhere to shelter from the storm, whereas the pound or the euro are seen as a lot more risky.
Yeah. Come September, October, it may be better. Whoever wins, at least there'll be a little bit more stability. Victoria, it's always a genuine pleasure, not only to spend time with you, but also to hear your wit and wisdom with your finger upon the pulse of the city. Good to see you, and thank you so much for your time. There we are, Victoria Scholar there, one of the top voices and thinkers in the city. Now, the government has delayed its decision on whether to approve a new coal mine for steel production in Cumbria, which would have been Britain's first coal mine in decades. It's all part of a plan to wean the UK off Russian imports of energy. Bit of background. In October 2020, Woodhouse Colliery is the first deep coal mine to be given the go-ahead in 30 years. If developed, the mine will produce coking coal, which is a type of coal essential to steel making. Now, ahead of last November's COP26 climate change conference in Glasgow, ministers launched an inquiry into the Woodhouse Colliery amidst protests from environmental activists. And now, just when the government was teetering on the cusp of approval, another delay is in place amidst recent resignations from the Prime Minister and also general instability in Westminster. So there's the background. I'm delighted to be joined now to talk about it all by Oliver Hodgson, who is a supporter of the Cumbria coal mine. Is this all about global warming, Oliver, or is it about planning and local concerns?
This is massively about planning and local concerns, Alistair. Whitehaven, where Woodhouse Colliery is going to be, is one of the most deprived postcodes in the country. These 500 well-paid jobs are absolutely necessary here. And if the government has any inclination of this levelling up agenda, they will see the sheer benefit. Boris was, I'm told, down the line, was due to be here last week. So that can only mean the mine was set to be given the go-ahead. And with this delay to the 17th of August, it's just not necessary for both sides of the argument. This has been going on since 2014. People really need to know what's going on now.
Well, in a curious sense, one of the problems, I mentioned it in my introduction, is you've now lost the Prime Minister, you've got everyone and their aunt trying to be the next Prime Minister. Everything is up in the air. Do you have any allies in the political world who would say, yeah, now is the time to do it, either because of energy security or because it would create jobs, or, as you've said all along, crucially, it helps UK steel?
Yeah, absolutely. It helps UK steel. And I think, you speak to anybody locally, Alistair, on both sides of the political spectrum. There's Labour councillors and Labour, media personalities locally, as well as Conservative media personalities, and our 2 local MPs and the Mayor, are very much behind this mine. They see the sheer impact this is going to create in West Cumbria. And, it's not just about the jobs, actually, it's the supply chain opportunities, the indirect opportunities around this mine. And we've got people across the world lecturing us about climate change and global emissions, particularly from the US. You've got your senators and your big media personalities over there blathering on about climate change, which obviously we cannot deny. There is a serious climate emergency. Nobody's denying that at all. But this mine is only going to contribute 0.1% of the UK's 1.1% of global emissions. It's minute, and the economic benefits far outweigh those climate concerns in my eyes.
Having looked at what all of the candidates to be the next leader of the Conservative Party has been saying, and whichever one of it wins will obviously, which one of them wins will then become the Prime Minister. Do you sense that notion, that very broad notion of energy security, is becoming a more powerful argument? I'm not going to rewrite the history books on climate change, and if you burn coal, it produces more carbon than other things, but you can set it off by trees and all the rest of it. But the idea of spending more time, intellectual effort on energy security, looking after ourselves, is in the ascendant?
Yes, definitely. We need steel for these new energy concepts as well. There's no denying that. And we import so much from across the UK and across Russia as well. Why would we be wanting to import and contribute to Russia's economy at the moment anyways, And a lot of where they come in mines in Europe and things, we're not sure of the workers' rights there as well. That's another really important argument to make here. This is going to be one of the safest mines that's ever been known. This is brand new. This is using modern technology. And I think it's really important for our future ambitions and for, your net zero goals and all the rest of it. We will need steel. Why not get that steel from our homeland, from West Cumbria?
Oliver, great to talk to you, and rather like our conversation about the retail sales figures, we end up talking about the shape of the United Kingdom in the future and indeed the shape of the world. Thank you very much, Steve, for spending time with us, and do keep in touch with us here at GB News on how that debate develops, particularly when you know whoever it is who is the next Prime Minister. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
No
now,
problem.
For the daily interview series on this programme, Money Talks. Motorsport, a predominantly male-orientated industry, and a wonderfully noisy one and very colourful one, is highlighted through the Austrian Grand Prix this Sunday and Silverstone in the United Kingdom the week before. Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz Jr. took the winner's podium. All great stuff there. Now, however, despite being one of the few sporting activities in which men and women can compete alongside each other on equal terms, and despite support from Lewis Hamilton and David Coulthard, women in motorsport do remain pretty low down the agenda. There is their own particular grouping where they compete, but very little presence, and not for a long time, in Formula One. There is a separate event, but not, as I say, in the main one that we just featured there with those clips. She, however, changed all of that, working very hard to change it going forward as well. Justina Williams owns a female-led motor racing team, XLR8 Motorsport, and is the UK ambassador for Girls on Track, a group of international women within motorsport. Beginning her working life at the young age of 16, Justina landed an apprenticeship in a nuclear power station as an industrial electrician, moving on to work in real estate, financial recruitment. Her motorsport passion was fully ignited when she began racing karts. On top of all of that, Justina is also a STEM ambassador, science, technology, engineering and the rest of it, for the British Army. So what can this woman not do? Well, I can tell you that she can sneak into the studio very quietly and sit down and is ready to cross swords with me. It's a real joy. I'm a fan. I'm a genuine fan, so it's a real joy to see you. And I love the work that Lewis is trying to do through Mercedes, and I love the work that David Coulthard is doing through his series. But blunt question, having just read that biog out, is it really about sexism? Is it about physicality? Or is it about opportunity?
I think it's about opportunity and also educating people that the opportunities are there. So for me, I had the opportunity. I had been a racing driver And someone said the Mini Challenge owners at the time, so I think you could run a really good race team. And I thought, let's give it a go.
And when you started doing karts, was that because Mum and Dad had a bit of spare money to do, or did they have... I mean, Lewis Hamilton started off in karts, as many of them do, and his dad ended up doing 3 jobs to support Lewis's passion.
Yeah, now, when I was very young, I was competing in judo. So I got my first gold medal at the age of 8 and then continued to compete in that. But it was later in life when me and my husband had the money that we'd built up over the years to go karting. Too late, really, but we enjoyed it. We were doing it for fun, but I have always been very competitive, so I always wanted to win.
And that, crucially, was because you wanted to do it, and as a couple, you were happy to pursue that. It wasn't that kind of thing, a kind of political campaign. I'm a woman and therefore I have equal rights. You just wanted to do it.
Oh, yeah, I'd always wanted to. I mean, when I was very young, I was told I should be on the track when I was driving on the road. But it's always been...
We won't go into that.
No, but it's always been that I've been very competitive, and it was something... You know, when my dad, we used to put the Go Faster stripes on the side of my dad's car, and it was just something that grew from there. And I loved cars anyway, and I thought, why not give it a go later in life, just to do something I can enjoy?
I said final point, but should have said penultimate point. And this is a serious political question in the sense that I know many friends in the motorsport think that what Coulthard and the female formula are doing is you know, it's quite a good thing. But what an awful lot of women, Claire Williams, your namesake, who runs her late dad's team, very much feel that what they want is the opportunity for women to have equal access to F1 so they can do Silverstone, they can do Austria and the rest of it. Do you agree with them?
I think, you know, everyone wants... Women have no reason to not progress into motorsport. And I think it's a case of, if you're determined from a young age, why can't you get into Formula One?
Yeah. Which is a perfect point to move on to the next thing. I did mention in passing, but just to remind folk who are kind enough to be watching and listening to our conversation, that you spent time in the nuclear industry, and you are a scientist in your own right as well. And you've now moved on, still got the interest in the motorsport, but your new passion strikes me as being really quite profound, and that is to try and open doors to bright young girls, bright young women, to say there literally is no limit to the sky and that glass ceiling is waiting to be broken.
Absolutely. Like me, you know, I was an electrician, industrial electrician on a nuclear power station, had a fantastic opportunity at such a young age and learnt so much in that time. And then I've gone on, as you said, into real estate. I've been a financial planner. I've had my own recruitment firm.
Was that private sector nuclear or government?
Private sector. And, you know, all these things that I've had the opportunity to do, I've never felt I've been held back. It's just I want to do it, and everyone else can do the same.
Do you sometimes feel, though, that you're kind of a rare shining example of that? Because I can remember a very good friend of mine, Patricia Hewitt, who was a very senior Secretary of State under Tony Blair, and one of her great passions, and she wasn't just a silly, wokey person, she just thought bright young girls, and then later on women, whether it was in school, university or industry, should see all sectors an opportunity, not least science, technology and computing she had a big thing about as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was years ago.
Yeah, and I think I've been very lucky to be involved with the British Army as a STEM ambassador for them. I'm an ambassador for the FIA Girls on Track UK, as you said. And it's really giving them the opportunity. We've done events recently where they come along, they see what we do and see behind the scenes. And it's really... And they say, who likes maths? And the amount of them that like maths, they put their hands up. Well, you don't just have to be an accountant. Maths is the most important thing of being an engineer in motorsport. So it opened their eyes, and they came away with such enthusiasm and excitement that I can do something different. There's so many things you can do.
Did I just hear a car go in my ear? I thought I did. She and I have heard quite enough of that. What I didn't know at all until I read the briefing that my lovely team, who just played racing cars in both of our ears, told me before we came on air, is the stuff with the Army. Now, I'm a Royal Air Force brat. My dad was there. And to be honest, I think he and his generation probably would not have approved of some of the advances that are being made. And yet, right here, I had dinner with the Chief of the Defence Staff the other night. One of the things he's most proud of is it's not tokenism, it's not filling in quotas. These women are competing alongside men, whether it's to command a ship, lead a squadron of fighter planes, a battalion of fighting soldiers, exclusively on merit.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And you're ahead of the game.
Yeah, again, just showing them that the opportunity is there. They need to see it, because often you talk about it, but it's different actually seeing it in action. So, yes, having these girls...
But old fuddy-duddy generals in their moustaches and sitting in White's Club sipping brandy and whatever are the least likely people to say, yeah, let's have equality here on merit? Is that because you pushed them?
No, it's that they really are pushing for having females in the army, and just in general, encouraging engineers that are females and engineers in general. We are lacking engineers in the UK. We need more. So me being able to help with the STEM and being an electrician by trade helps that, and I did that, and then I've moved on to do something else. Again, it's just very much, it is all about educating them.
Funnily enough, that is my final book. It's a lovely Christopher Nieper, whose dad set up a clothing manufacturer. He now runs that company. They make clothes and they sell it and they retail as well. And he was saying the real answer to our economic woes at the moment is to invest in skills, which leads to greater productivity. This isn't just equality for bright young things who happen to be able to drive very quickly, rather elegantly. So are you talking to employers as much as you're talking to schools, or is the real core work to be done at a school level?
I think it helps getting them at a young age, because they're very influential then, and they ask so many questions. Some of the schoolgirls have had to come to us from about the age of 8. There's question after question, and it's quite fantastic that they have all these questions to ask. So, yes, employers as well, but I think it needs to start at a younger age, and therefore working with the Army and with the FIA to get them at a very young age is where you get a better result of them realising.
When we've done, I'll put you in touch with my daughter, who was a headmistress at the age of 27 and is now a manager in an education division. Justina Williams, I cannot tell you how much of a pleasure it was to meet you, but also to listen to that great wisdom and optimism. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Good to see you. That, I'm afraid, is all that we have time for today, but what a truly brilliant way to end. I hope you agree with me. Join us again tomorrow at 1 p.m, and it'll be Mark Longhurst here standing in for Liam Halligan, looking at the latest GDP, gross domestic product figures. But it's been a real pleasure keeping your company this afternoon and indeed yesterday. This is GB News. I'm Alistair Stewart, and that was On the Money.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. An extreme heat warning has been issued for Sunday because of some exceptionally high temperatures expected, but for the rest of today, it's actually turning cooler for northern parts of the UK, albeit temporarily during the next few days, as a cold front sinks south. Now, that's moving into an area of high pressure, which continues to dominate our weather. However, the cold front means that there is a lot of cloud in the sky, certainly more compared to the last couple of days across the UK. It has brought some wet weather to the northwest, but the rain tending to fizzle as it pushes south. And just a few spots expected for Wales, into the Midlands, for example. However, as the cloud comes south, it will impact temperatures, mostly mid to high 20s, perhaps 31 there for London. Much cooler to the north of the cold front at 19 for Glasgow and for Belfast, but sunny skies for northern Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland behind the front, before some showers push in during the evening and overnight for mainly northern Scotland and perhaps the north coast of Northern Ireland. Otherwise, some areas of cloud further south. A cooler night in the north, but still a muggy